Welcome back to episode 15. We are here with the Prune, which is now about to arrive at Eve in a few days, and we'll have a retrograde burn there to insert ourselves into orbit around the purple planet. In the meantime, though, we've just got some more drifting in space to do. So, my original plan with this was we do have that contract that is to arrive at Eve and complete a flyby and then return home from to Kerbin from Eve, except that the planets are not aligned for that. And so this will probably end up just sitting in orbit. Um, the two main plans that I really had for this were either return it to Kerbin somehow, which I don't have enough fuel for, or get it to Eve, stay in orbit, and then probably have enough fuel to do stuff around Gilly. So right now we're just getting into position to orient ourselves for this retrograde burn, because it is very likely that we will run out of communications. We will not have enough contact once we are in orbit, because we do only have direct connection with the KSC, and that is not always visible from the horizon because our communications network is not powerful enough, as powerful as the space station. So we can see there's Gilly there and Eve, and we're not even in the sphere of influence of Eve yet, and it is already big and bright. And we can really appreciate just how far away Gilly is from the planet there. But we've got just a little bit more on our approach, going almost 11 kilometers per second relative to the sun. We'll see how fast we're coming in to Eve shortly once the sphere of influence changeover happens. And I believe that's for the alarm that I had set for the sphere of influence switch. There's the notice. So within a couple of minutes, we will, yep, there we go. We're officially in the sphere of influence of Eve, which means we have new science. Mystery goo. The goo is practicing turning purple to blend in. Well, we won't be actually going into Eve's atmosphere. We're just going to be going around it. But, hey, the goo's already purple. Look at that. And then we have the Science Junior here. The radiotech activity has caused the plutonium samples to glow even more. Apart from that, everything is normal. Fascinating. Transmit that home. We have two of those materials bays, the Science Juniors, one for high over Eve and one for low over Eve. And we have three of the Mystery Goos. Same there, but I'm going to use that third one for the surface of Gilly. And then we have our thermometer and barometer, of course, which are the infinitely usable ones. So here I'm just seeing if I can at all modify my maneuver to get us anywhere near to Kerbin. And the answer is no, although we could get another Eve encounter. So there's really not really, there's no purpose in trying to bring this home. The alignment is just not right. We would have to wait for Eve to catch up a little bit. So just tweak the maneuver node back to its original state. And it looks like Gilly is actually in a very good place that we can basically just come straight up to Gilly and do some further corrections and then arrive there with the tiny, tiny amount of fuel that we'll have left. So we also have the pressure data. Eve watches you malevolently as you feel the compulsion to measure the pressure in space. Measuring the temperature of space appears to be quite impossible. Yeah, we've seen that one before. Now, just making sure I don't have any other experiments. This is launched with fairly old technology, so I think this is all of the science that we had available. And you'll also notice we have the tiny, tiny little relay antenna because that at the time was the most powerful piece of equipment that we had, which is just barely enough to reach all the way back to Kerbin. It's almost on the other side of the system. So now falling in, there's Gilly whizzing by, disappearing behind Flight Engineer now. It'll come on the other side. Just a tiny speck, there it goes. And Eve, it looks almost white. It's really hard to see the purple there. And I think that's probably a mixture of scatterer and environmental visual enhancements. I think the EVE mod is responsible for clouds on Eve, ironically enough. And scatterer just makes the atmosphere behave a whole lot more realistically, although I'm not sure what the overlap is between them on these, on Eve's appearance here. Can barely see anything at all on the surface. Those clouds are dense. We'll have to send some atmosphere probes here at some point. And depending on how much fuel we have actually in this left over, maybe we'll plunge it down for one last just to decommission it, see how deep it can go. So now coming in almost 6.5 kilometers per second here. This is very fast. I doubt we'll make 7 because we also have this burn that's going to start pretty soon. But this is honestly comparable to like real life Earth orbital velocity. Although because Joule is a much closer size, Joule is about the same size as Earth in real life, and it has similar orbital speed properties and numbers as well. Although it will be a while before we can send anything to Joule. The encounter window is still several weeks away. We'll have to launch something then. But we're now low over Eve, so we can do our second set of mystery goo. The goo stares nervously at Eve. At this time, yeah, we don't have contact with the Space Center anymore. So we can't transmit just yet. Mystery, Science Junior is now moving. When you open the bay, there are no samples. You close the doors and reopen them, and they're all there again. Is Gilly playing tricks on you? Well, we'll have to go there and ask it. The readout from the barometer spells, don't send me down there. The thermometer outputs a significantly higher reading than rotated to the planet. I guess Eve is radiating away heat. I suppose, I guess it wouldn't actually be radiated away, but it would just be the light that is being reflected off. Similar to how Venus in real life, it is very hot, but that is because it retains a lot of the heat that it gets, even though the clouds are very reflective and they reflect away, I think about like 80% of the sunlight that reaches them. The rest of the 20% basically has nowhere to go once it reaches the surface. So we get ourselves inserted into Eve. Watch the green sunset there. Now I'm expecting sunsets at Joule to be purple. I wonder if that'll hold up. So now we can start transmitting the data once we're back in range, once the Space Center has gone over the horizon. And now we can start plotting our course to arrive at Gilly. So just moving the maneuver around here. And yeah, this is pretty fortunate timing here. Gilly happens to be in a really convenient spot where I could basically just another, 230 meters per second and basically just end up at Gilly. And then we'll probably have to spend another couple hundred slowing down once we're there, but it's basically a negligible delta V loss to actually land there. Transmitting the rest of it, the rest of that data back home. So now the only other science that we can actually get from here is around Gilly. And once we get there, complete the burn, and yeah, bring ourselves in on an encounter. 15 kilometers, that's very high for Gilly. Gilly has a radius of about 20 kilometers, I believe. So 15 over sea level is about, 35 kilometers from the center, which is pretty close. Now, in the sphere of influence, moving at about 300 meters per second, we'll have to kill basically all of that speed. And yeah, now we're captured into orbit, a 6 meter per second suborbital trajectory, 3 meters per second over the surface there. Gilly is very small and things tend to be very slow around there. Now, the problem is I want to get high science, which I've done, and I also want to get in space low over Gilly. But the highest mountains are above the cutoff for low space. And you can see I'm coming up over the highlands. So I actually want to go north into this basin over here. And I overdo it there, and now I'm on an escape trajectory. So slow back down. And I want to land, yeah, roughly in that basin there. Just kind of push myself over that way. This descent took a very, very long time. I cut through most of it here. But between this and that last bit was about maybe 10 minutes at 4 times speed. So things move very slowly. We're falling like 17 meters per second. This is probably going to be the slowest landing I've ever done. But we're low. It's time for science. You didn't expect the temperature of space to be any different here than elsewhere. You weren't disappointed. Log pressure. You're barely even in orbit, much less landed and surrounded by air. Yeah, there's no hope of having any atmosphere around Gilly. So that's all we can do. And then we'll have pressure and the temperature again, along with the mystery goo once we've landed. And honestly, we can just start our descent now. 10 meters per second. And just let ourselves fall. This was very slow to do. There was probably about another 5-ish minutes between those cuts there. So that's the power of video editing. So now we're 300 meters per second. This is real time, how slow we were moving. A little over 11 meters per second. And honestly, I think with just a quick touch of throttle to bring ourselves to a more reasonable speed, that's really all that I need to do to actually just land here. So slowing down a little bit because I do not want to break that engine. So yeah, 4 meters per second. And honestly, I can probably just leave this and we'll be just fine. But I want to just see how gentle I can get it. I don't want to break that engine, even though that would be very, very unlikely. You have to actually kind of try to crash into Gilly. It's very low gravity. I believe it's either 1/20th or 1/200th of Kerbin surface gravity, which is very tiny. So now falling just under a meter per second now, 20 meters above the surface. Yeah, this is definitely going to be the gentlest landing I've ever performed. There's Eve over there in the sky. One last touch of the throttle. And a touchdown. 0.2 meters per second. There we go. 0.3. And there we go. We just kind of stick down on the engine bell there, and we've landed. Fascinating. Well, let's do some science. Mystery goo. The goo has clumped up into a spheroid and become slightly brittle. Interesting behavior. Probably a sphere because there is basically no gravity, so it has its own. Nil, as though tiny space provides a atmosphere. Gilly is chilly. Well, that doesn't seem right, but the thermometer's in the shade, so that actually does make sense. So I don't want to transmit this just yet, because if I lost power, then I would probably fall over, and I don't want to risk breaking my solar panels, even though I don't think that would happen. So we're just going to store that and transmit it once we're in space again. Take a moment to admire the view here. There's Eve over the horizon. Could probably send a postcard from here. And now we just have to get ourselves back into orbit. I don't want to stay on Gilly forever. And this satellite, at this point, there's no other science that we can really get unless we decide to plunge into Eve's atmosphere, although I don't even think we have enough fuel for that. So we're now in a circular Gilly orbit, which took a very long time to get into, and now an escape trajectory. So back around the orbit of Eve momentarily. Yep, there we go. And I'm going to just drop my orbit a little bit so I don't encounter Gilly again. And plot a maneuver, and this thing will probably just be a relay for around Eve. And from that, we got a ton of money. We've completed some parameters of that contract to explore Eve, all but except for returning from the planet. A bunch of world first milestones that push us over the limit into the millions of funds, just barely. So with that, we upgrade the runway as well as the administration building. And we're able to unlock a bunch of new science. We have 620 science, which is enough for a couple of nodes. So we do the scanning tech, which gives us a whole bunch of other experiments that will give us even more science, most of which are, in fact, atmospheric or surface scanning experiments. But nonetheless, that is a ton of experimental data that we will be able to collect. And then we could go for some nuclear propulsion, but in the end, I choose the high power electrics. And with those brand new bits of technology, we're going to launch the first module of our first ever space station. There are no crew on this just yet. This is just the central module of it. It is called Untitled Spacecraft as of now, but I believe the name I selected for this was Skylab. Of course, inspired by the real Skylab in the 70s, I believe, which was the last thing to have ever flown on a Saturn V rocket. They basically converted the I think it was the S4B, the upper stage on the Apollo missions that took the spacecraft to the moon. They basically hollowed that out and turned it into a living quarters, which was extremely spacious. There was a lot of actual free room to move around in, very uncharacteristic compared to the spacecraft of today. We just get this thing into orbit. I want to go for about 100-kilometer orbit, higher than the 80 that I usually go for, but I don't want to clog up space around this space station. I want it to be nice and clear in its own orbit, and that way we don't have to worry about debris or anything colliding with it. So get our apoapsis up there, deploy the solar panels and the radiators, and then the rest of the solar panels there. So that bottom section, the 2.5-meter wide parts, there's a crew can and a science lab on there. With it, we can bring a bunch of these experiments and process them for even more scientific value. That top section there has some monopropellant fuel, probe control, batteries, the science experiments, and a ton of life support packs, which I'm not sure how much life support is actually on here because there's no crew and I didn't bother to measure. Now, the other thing I've done differently is this stage here, you can see has a probe core in there. And we've left some fuel behind, and then we can deorbit it. Now, I don't want this thing to make the surface, honestly. I want it to see it burn up. So I burn straight down to go as fast as I can, as deep into the atmosphere, and let this thing sway into orientation. The engine gets a little bit warm. Yep, there you can see it's starting to overheat. And then I guess this thing is really aerodynamic because it just completely makes it through unharmed. Coming down about 200 meters per second before we crash. And actually, the probe core and the fairing ring did survive, and they rolled for quite a bit before coming to a stop so I could recover them. Now back to the space station in orbit. I want to move this portion, this upper science part here. So I'm going to undock from there. Undock. And now I want to reattach it to the side, and that way we'll make some more room along the axis of this station for crewed sections. So set that port as target. And now we can use this fancy other mod that I have. This is the docking port alignment indicator made by Navy Fish, as well as a few others who I don't remember the names of. Apologies for that. But this is a very handy tool for when you're docking in space. And this is, I believe, the first time I'm actually using these docking ports. So this is the first time we're seeing it. And it's just a very intuitive layout of a bunch of different information that makes docking a whole lot easier. So this big orange marker, I want to line that up with the central crosshairs, although the RCS is proving a little tricky. So now this means that the docking ports are lined up. There's also a rotation indicator and some other numbers as well. But the important thing is this ginormous green crosshair that was red before. It became green because now I am actually behind the docking port and I'll be able to move towards it. So now I just want to line that up with the center as well. You can see there's the little yellow velocity marker as well. Bottom left of it has some distance. The bottom right corner has relative to the docking port distance, like along the axis. So how far I need to actually travel forwards to make it to the docking port, as well as my velocity towards it. And there's a little rotation indicator at the top, that little orange bit around the edge there, which is not super important, although I do want to make sure that I don't break into these radiators with my solar panels, although there should be enough room. Now, it is my first time actually performing a docking with this, so I do overcorrect at times and end up having to waste a little more monopropellant, but we have plenty on here. It's really not that much of a problem. So just kind of mashing keys to stop all of my movement. And then we could start to just drift in to the docking port. So you can see, yeah, there we go. Give ourselves a little push. Now we're moving towards it at 0.22 meters per second. Very fast. The space shuttle docked with the space station moving about, I think, maybe 0.05 meters per second, which is about a couple inches every second. So very slow and sedate process. But here the magnetic attraction is very strong. And so you can kind of ram into the docking ports with ease. Get myself lined up a little to the left there, and then bring myself the rest of the way. Just a meter to go. And we have docked. So this is going to be a platform for us to test Kerbal endurance, as well as a scientific hub for the experiments that we unlock. And we'll make some expansions and eventually put a crew up here and see just the limits of our Kerbal endurance. And this will surely be helpful for future interplanetary missions, but that will all be in future episodes. Until next time.